1,200,000 won a month. Grade 7, general cleaning, effective Monday. You may sign the transfer. Or you may resign. In my experience, people resign.
Yes, ma'am. May I ask one question before I sign? Does the change of grade affect the class of my shares?
You have 6,000 shares. My husband handed out confetti in a bad year because he could not pay his people. It is not a shareholding, it is a souvenir.
Then I'll take the mop. Ma'am, Monday's meeting, is it still at 9? I'd just like to be on time.
Why does a woman who has just been cut to $900 a month ask her employer, very politely, whether the change affects her shareholder class? Why did Madame Yoon Jang-hui, who had rehearsed that meeting for a week, go gray at a question about what time Monday's board meeting started? What was inside the biscuit tin that Simone Whitaker kept on the top shelf of a rented room in Bupyeong under a folded winter coat for 9 years? And why, 72 hours later, would the chairman of Segang Partners walk out of a boardroom in Incheon without the company he had already told his investors he owned? Because long before Simone Whitaker ever pushed a mop across that clean room floor, she had spent 9 years quietly buying the one thing that family had decided was worthless. And on the Friday they cut her salary to force her out. She had already been the largest voting shareholder of Daejeon Optical for 11 months. This is her story. And it starts 9 years earlier on a factory floor in Incheon. In the winter the company almost died. Simone Whitaker came to Korea at 25 with one suitcase, a 2-year technical contract, and a mother in Baltimore who told her to go. She had grown up on Poplar Grove Street, in a row house where the radiator knocked all winter, and she had been good at exactly one thing since she was 14. She could see. Not metaphorically, literally. Simone could look at a curved piece of glass under a lamp and tell you where it was wrong by a fraction of a wavelength, the way some people can hear that a piano is a quarter tone flat. A community college instructor in Baltimore noticed it, put her in front of an optical bench, and told her the truth. There were maybe 400 people in the world who could do what her eyes did without a machine. 300 of them were in Germany or Japan or Korea. So she took a technician's contract at a lens plant in Incheon, and she told her mother it was for 2 years. Daejeon Optical made precision lenses. Not eyeglasses. The small, brutal, expensive kind, endoscope objectives. Industrial inspection optics. The glass inside machines that look at things human beings are not supposed to see. It was 140 people in a long, low building near the Jeongan Canal. And it had been founded in 1988 by a man named Han Ji-taik, who had started with 2 second-hand grinders and a loan from his wife's brother. Simone met him on her 4th day, when he came down to the polishing room at 11 at night to see the American everyone was talking about. He was 61, in a cardigan with a hole in the elbow, and he did not say hello. He put a lens blank in front of her, one he had been carrying in his pocket, and he said, "Tell me what's wrong with it." She held it up under the lamp and turned it a quarter turn and said, "Nothing's wrong with it. Somebody just polished the edge before the center, so it'll go wrong in about 6 months. Han Ji-taik looked at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, once, like a cough. 6 months, he said. It took my last man 2 years to say that, and he said it to my face like it was my fault. It was your fault, Simone said. You're the one who hired him. That was how she got the corner bench by the window. And how a 61-year-old Korean machinist decided in about 90 seconds that this woman was staying. The polishing room ran 3 shifts. The man who ran it was Jo Man-sik, 62 years old then, with hands like tree roots and 40 years of glass dust in his lungs. He did not want her. He said, in front of 11 other people, that the bench had belonged to a man who died at it, and he was not giving it to a foreigner who would be gone by spring. Simone said, "Then teach me badly and I'll be gone faster." He taught her for 6 years. That is the thing about the polishing room that nobody upstairs ever understood. It was not a factory floor. It was a workshop, and everything in it moved at the speed of a person's hands. There was a way of holding the pitch lap that Jo Man-sik had learned from a man who learned it in Japan in 1964, and it could not be written down, and it could not be taught by video. It could only be taught by an old man standing behind a young person for 4,000 hours saying no. Not like that. Again. By her second year, Simone was doing the 14mm aspheres, which were the hardest thing the company made and the reason it still existed. And in the spring of that second year, the money ran out. Daejin had bet everything on a medical contract that was supposed to close in March. It closed in November instead, and between March and November there were payroll days. Simone found out the way everyone found out, which is that the vending machine in the corridor stopped being restocked. Then the night shift was cut. Then the heat in the second building. Then, on a Thursday in June, Han Ji-taek called all 140 of them into the yard and stood on a pallet and told them the truth, which no one expected, because bosses do not do that. He said the company had 11 weeks of cash. He said he was not going to lie to them about it, and he was not going to fire 40 people to buy himself another quarter, because 40 people was exactly how many people knew how to make the thing they sold. And then he offered them the deal that this entire story turns on. He said, "I will pay you 60% of your wage in cash, every month on time. I swear it on my father. And the other 40% I will pay you in shares of this company. Not options, shares. Signed, sealed, notarized, yours. And because I'm asking you to eat 40% less for a year, those shares will not be ordinary shares. 10 votes each." He had gone to a lawyer in Bupyeong and had it drawn properly. Because Han Ji-taek was a machinist and machinists believe that a thing is either made right or it is not made. 200,000 shares of Class B stock, 10 votes apiece, split between 34 workers who agreed to take the cut. Every one of them notarized. Every one of them entered in the shareholder register in blue ink in Han Ji-taek's own handwriting. And one clause, which the lawyer argued against and which the old man insisted on, because he had watched a friend's company get taken apart in the 90s. A Class B share converts to an ordinary share only if the holder resigns. If the company terminates them, the shares stay Class B, and the company has to buy them at an independent valuation. Han Ji-taek explained it to the yard in one sentence, in the plainest Korean he had. "If I ever build a company where the smart thing to do is get rid of you," he said, "I want it to hurt." 29 of the 34 took the deal. Simone Whitaker, who was 26 years old and had $411 in a Korean bank account, took it because she had nowhere else to be. She got 6,000 shares. Nobody in that yard, including the man on the pallet, thought those pieces of paper would ever be worth anything. That was the whole point. That was why they were given away. What Simone didn't know yet was that of the 29 people standing in that yard, she would be the only one still holding hers 9 years later, and that the reason would cost her every won she ever saved. There was a man on the night shift that winter who was very bad at his job. He was 29, he wore work boots that were too new, and he chipped 2 blanks in his first week, which at 40,000 won a blank is a thing people remember. Simone assumed he was somebody's nephew. Everybody assumed that. What he actually was Han Jun-seo, the founder's son, who had a master's degree from a good school in Michigan, and had come home in October because his father was 3 months from losing the company. Han Ji-taek had refused to give him an office. He had said, in front of the accountant, that his son could have a desk upstairs the day he could tell a good lens from a bad one in the dark, and until then he could stand at a bench like everyone else. So Jun-seo stood at a bench badly for 7 months. The first real conversation he ever had with Simone Whitaker happened at 2:40 in the morning in the corridor by the vending machine that no longer had anything in it except 1 column of canned coffee. He bought 2. He held both of them for about 15 seconds before he handed her one, and when she looked at him he said, "They come out too hot. Your hands are cold." It became a thing. It stayed a thing for 9 years. He would buy 2, hold both until they were bearable, and hand her one, and neither of them ever said a single word about it again. They talked about glass mostly, because Jun-seo wanted to understand the thing his father had built, and Simone was the only person on the floor who would explain it to him without either resenting him or flattering him. She told him why the 14mm was hard. She told him the truth about the yields, which were not what the front office thought they were. She told him at 4 in the morning in February, standing in a stairwell in 2 coats because the heat was off, that his father was going to die in that building if somebody didn't take the load off him. and that it wasn't going to be a consultant, it was going to have to be his son. Jun Seo did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "He doesn't think I can do it. He doesn't think you want to," Simone said. "That's different. That one you can fix tonight." The medical contract closed in November. It closed because Daejin could still deliver the 14mm asphere at a tolerance. 3 of its competitors had quietly stopped promising. And the reason it could still deliver was that 34 people had eaten 40% less for 11 months. Nobody wrote that down anywhere. But it was true, and everyone in the polishing room knew it was true. The company came back. Then it came back hard. By the following year, Daejin was turning away work. By the year after that, it had a second building, a Class 100 clean room, and a valuation that made a Seoul newspaper print the word "quiet giant." And this is the part where the story about the shares gets ugly. And it gets ugly in the most ordinary way there is. People needed money. Kim Chun-ho's wife got sick, and he sold his 4,000 shares back to the company for 8 million won, which felt like a fortune in a hospital corridor. Park Young-dae's son got into a university in Seoul, and he sold his. A man named Hwang retired to Jeju and sold his the week he left. The buyback was always the same price. The price never moved, no matter what the company was worth, because the price had been written into a company resolution in the bad year and nobody had ever had a reason to change it. 8 million won for 4,000 shares. 2,000 won a share. And the person handling the paperwork always, every time, with enormous patience and a box of tissues on the desk, was the finance director, Ko Sang-hoon. Simone watched it happen 5 times before she understood what she was watching. The 5th time was Jo Min-sik's cousin, and Simone sat with him in the canteen afterward while he counted the money and said, twice, that it was very generous. She went home that night to her room in Bupyeong and did arithmetic on the back of a delivery flyer. She was not an accountant. She did not need to be. 200,000 Class B shares, 10 votes each, was 2 million votes. There were 800,000 ordinary shares in the world, 1 vote each. Which meant that the people who had eaten 40% less for 11 months, the 34 names in blue ink, held 71% of the voting power of Daejin Optical. And they were selling it, 1 funeral and 1 tuition bill at a time, for 2,000 won a share. Simone sat on the floor of that room with the flyer in her hand for a long time. Then she got up and took a biscuit tin off the shelf, the one her mother had sent her cookies in the first Christmas, and she put her own 6,000 shares inside it. And she started saving. What she didn't know yet was how long it would take, or that the last name on her list would be the hardest one, or that the reason it was hard would be the reason all of it worked. Han Jia-taek died in the spring of the 4th year. It was fast, and it was at home, and there was no drama in it at all, which somehow made it worse. 200 people came to the funeral hall in Incheon, and about 130 of them worked in that building. Simone stood in line for 2 hours in a black dress she had bought that morning, and when she got to the front, the widow looked at her for 1 full second longer than she looked at anyone else. Madame Yoon Jang-hui was 57 then. She had spent 30 years as the wife of a man who wore cardigans with holes in the elbows, in a city where that was a thing people noticed. And she had spent 30 years being told kindly by other women that her husband was a wonderful craftsman. She had wanted to be the wife of a chairman. 2 weeks after the funeral, she became chairman of the board. And the first thing she did, before the will was even settled, was have the entire ground floor of the head office repainted. Han Jun-seo became chief executive at 34, and he was, by every number that mattered, good at it. He was also, from the first week, outvoted in his own house. His father had left him 25% of the ordinary shares. He had left his wife 43%, and he had left her the chairmanship, because he was a man of 1952 and that was what a man of 1952 did. Which meant that Jun-seo ran the company and his mother ran Jun-seo. Simone saw the shape of it about 4 months in. At a company anniversary dinner she had been invited to because the polishing room was being photographed for a brochure. She was standing near the door with a paper cup when Madame Yoon came through with 2 other women and stopped and looked at her and said, in Korean, to the woman on her left, That's the one my husband liked. Simone had understood conversational Korean for 3 years by then. She had never mentioned it to anyone upstairs, because on a factory floor the useful thing is not what you can say. It is what people say in front of you. She smiled and inclined her head and said nothing at all. She doesn't understand, Madame Yoon said. It's fine. Then she reached out and adjusted the collar of Simone's blouse with 2 fingers, the way you would straighten a picture frame, and moved on. Jun-hyo saw it from across the room. He came over afterward and stood beside her without looking at her. The way you stand next to somebody when you don't want a room to notice you're standing next to them. And he said, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, Simone said. Be somewhere else next time she does it. That's the same thing. No, she said. One of them costs you something. He looked at her then. She was already walking away. Here is what was true, and what neither of them said out loud for 6 years. He was in love with her. She had been in love with him since a stairwell in February with the heat off, and she had decided on the walk home that same night that nothing would ever be done about it. Because Simone Whitaker was a technician on a work visa in a company owned by his family, and there is a version of that story that ends with her being the woman who tried. And she had watched enough of the world to know exactly how that version reads. So they had 9 years of canned coffee. They had 100 conversations at 2 in the morning that were about lens tolerances, the way a letter can be about the weather. And once, at the end of a very long night in the 5th year, he had said her name in a way that was not about glass, and she had said, Jun Seo. Don't hand me something you can't carry, and gone back to her bench. He never brought it up again. He also never married anyone. His mother noticed both of those things. Madame Yoon Jang-hoo was not a stupid woman, and this is important, because the story does not work if she is stupid. She was a woman who had built her entire life on the idea that her family was going to be somebody, and who had watched her husband spend 30 years choosing craftsmen over class. She had a son who was 35, unmarried, and at the plant 6 days a week. She did not need to be told what he was doing there. She could see it from the parking lot. And so she began, patiently, in the way of women who have 30 years of practice at getting things done through other people, to remove Simone Whitaker from the building. Not fire her. Nobody said fire. In the 5th year, the polishing room was reorganized, and the corner bench by the window was reassigned, and Simone was moved to a bay under the fluorescents in the middle of the floor. In the 6th year, a new job classification appeared in the HR system called Senior Operative Grade 4, which paid 11% less than Senior Technician, and 3 people were moved into it. 2 of them were foreign. In the 7th year, the company hired a German optics consultant on a fee that was, for 2 weeks of work, about what Simone made in 14 months, and the consultant's first recommendation was that the 14mm asphere process be documented, because it depended too heavily on one operator. Simone documented it, all of it. 41 pages in her own handwriting, with photographs. Joe Mansik, 70 years old and 2 years retired by then, came in on a Saturday to check it and told her she was a fool. They will read this and then they will not need you, he said. They will read this and they still won't be able to do it, Simone said. That's what it says on page 31. Nobody ever reads page 31. Then she poured him a cup of tea from a flask and said, Agiosi, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be insulted by it. Then ask it badly. Your shares, she said. The 4,000. Keo Sang-hoon has been to your house twice. Joe Mansik put his cup down. 3 times, he said. Don't sell them to him, Simone said. Sell them to me. You don't have 8 million won. I have 3, she said. I'll pay you the rest at 400,000 a month for 13 months. And I'll sign a paper, and if I miss one, you keep the shares and the money. The old man looked at her for a long time, the way he had looked at her in her first week when he did not want her at the bench. Why? He said. And Simone told him the truth, which was the only currency she ever used with him. Because in about 5 years, somebody in that family is going to try to sell this company, she said. And when they do, they're going to count the votes in the room. And I want the room to be full of us. Joe Mansik signed on the 11th of March. He was the 9th name. There were 29 names on the list Han Ji-taek had written in blue ink. Simone had one of them. The company had bought back 11. That left 17 people in the world holding Class B shares, and Simone Whitaker spent 6 years finding all of them. She kept the list in the back of a Korean grammar workbook in pencil, with a number next to each name that was how much she still owed them. This is the part of the story where the mechanism is not clever. It is just slow. She made 3,200,000 won a month, which was about $2,400. 900 of that went to her mother in Baltimore every month, without one exception in 9 years. Yvonne Whitaker was on dialysis 3 mornings a week by then, at a center on North Avenue. And the $900 was the difference between a daughter who had gone to Korea and a daughter who had left. 400,000 won went to rent. A room, not an apartment. On the 4th floor of a building in Bupaeong, with a shared kitchen and a landlady who called her our American. The rest went into other people's hands, 400,000 at a time. For shares in a company nobody was allowed to know she owned. She did not travel. She did not buy clothes. She had one good coat for 6 years and had it relined twice. The women in the polishing room thought she was sending everything home, and she let them think it because it was almost true and because the almost was the only secret she had. There was exactly one person in Korea who knew, and it was not Jun Seo. Renata Cole was from Detroit, 41, and had been in Seoul for 12 years running a 2-table place in Itaewon that sold catfish and grits to homesick people at prices that made no sense. Simone went there on the first Sunday of every month, and it was the only 4 hours a month she stopped being careful. "Girl," Renata said, the first time she understood what the pencil list actually was. "You are buying stock in the company of the people who are trying to run you off." "I'm buying it from the people who built it," Simone said. "Same paper." "Not the same paper. Mine votes 10 times. Renata put down the coffee pot. "Say that again slow." So Simone said it again slow, and Renata sat down across from her in her own restaurant and said the thing that Simone had been not saying to herself for 4 years. "Baby, do you understand that if you get all of them, you don't work there anymore? You own there." "I'm not going to get all of them," Simone said. "How many you need?" Simone had done the arithmetic so many times she didn't have to think. 114,000 shares, she said. "Then it doesn't matter what the family holds. Not on anything that needs a vote." "And where are you now?" 61,000. Renata leaned back and laughed until she had to wipe her eyes. 9 years, she said. "You got the patience of a glacier and the salary of a substitute teacher, Lord." The buying was never once easy. Park Yong-dae wouldn't sell to her because she was a woman, and then 2 years later, because she was foreign, and then, the winter after that, because his son had gotten a job at a bank and had told him the shares were worth nothing. And Simone paid him more than they were worth on the buyback, and let him keep believing he had won. Number 12 was a widow in Anzen who had inherited her husband's 4,000 and had never once opened the envelope. It took Simone 4 visits and a lot of tangerines. Number 14 was a man who had left the company hating it and would only sell to her when she promised, out loud, that she would never sell to the family. "Swear it on someone," he said. "On my mother," Simone said, and he wrote the certificate over that afternoon. Number 16 was Kim Chun-ho, who had sold his own 4,000 to Ko Sang-hoon 9 years earlier to pay for his wife's treatment, and who did not have shares to sell at all. What he had was a daughter. Kim Daeun was 34, a corporate lawyer at a mid-sized firm in Uido, and she had put herself through law school on money that came partly from 4,000 shares sold at 2001. Simone met her because she went to Kim Chun-ho's 60th birthday, and she went to a retired man's 60th birthday because she went to all of them for 9 years, and she was the only person from the company who ever did. Daeun found her by the shoe rack at the end of the night. "My father says you keep buying old men's stock," she said. "He says you're either a fool or you're the only one who read the founder's clause. Which do you think?" "I think," Daeun said, "that I would very much like to see the shareholders' agreement from that year. And I think you have a copy, and I think you have never shown it to a lawyer." Simone showed her the next Saturday, in the back of Renata's restaurant, over catfish. Kim Daeun read the 19 pages twice without saying anything, and on the second pass she stopped and put her finger on a paragraph and made a sound Simone had never heard a lawyer make. "Do you know what this is?" she said. "It's the resignation clause. The shares only convert if you quit. That's the famous half. Read the second sentence." Simone read it. It said that if the company or the board took any action for the purpose of causing a Class B holder to leave, a change to their duties, their grade, or their pay, the affected holder could demand that the founder's original valuation clause be triggered, and that any transaction pending before the board would be suspended until an independent valuation was complete. "Your chairman can't fire you," Daeun said. "That's what everyone knows. But she also can't push you. And if she pushes you while she's got a sale on the table, she stops her own sale," Simone said. "She stops it cold," Daeun said. "And she never see it coming because nobody in that family has read this document since the year it was signed. I promise you that. I read wills for a living. Rich families don't read the papers from the years they were poor. Those years embarrass them." That was in November of the 8th year. Simone was at 98,000 shares. What she didn't know yet was that, on the other side of the city, in an office in Yeouido. Yeouido? You didn't know Yeouido. Was that, on the other side of the city, in an office side of the city, in an office in Yeouido. A man she had never met was already looking at a slide with the word Daejin on it, or that the deck had a page in it with the number 150 million on it, and another page, near the back, with her job classification. The first crack came in a plastic folder somebody left on a wheeled cart outside the clean room. It was the 17th of January, and Simone was in gown and gloves doing the last inspection of a batch at 6 in the morning. And when she came out through the air shower, there was a document wallet sitting on the cart where the batch cards go. It had been left there by an assistant who had gone to the bathroom. It was labeled in English Project Dongbek Confidential. Dongbek means camellia. It is the flower that blooms in the winter and then falls off the branch whole, all at once, still perfect. Simone did not open it. She stood there for 4 seconds with her gloves still on, and then an assistant came back down the corridor apologizing, and picked it up, and went away. But she had read the cover sheet, because the cover sheet was face up, and the cover sheet had 2 lines on it. Target: Daejin Optical Co. Limited. Acquire: Segang Partners. She went back to her bench and did 4 lenses and did not think about anything else for 9 hours. The second piece of proof she went and got herself, and it took her 3 weeks and a form. Under Korean company law, a shareholder is entitled to inspect the shareholder register. Any shareholder. Even one with 6,000 shares. Especially one with 6,000 shares. Kim Daeun wrote the request in 3 lines and told her to hand it in on a Friday afternoon, to the General Affairs Office, and to be extremely polite and slightly stupid about it. "Say you need it for a visa renewal," Daeun said. "Say the immigration officer asked about your assets. They'll believe that instantly because it's the only reason they can imagine you'd ask." It worked exactly like that. Ko Sang-hoon's assistant printed her a copy on Monday, cheerfully, and even circled her own name in pencil to be helpful. Simone took it home to Bupeong, and sat on the floor with it and the biscuit tin, and she cross-checked it line by line against her pencil list until 2 in the morning. The register said there were 44,000 Class B shares outstanding. There were 200,000. She had 102,000 of them in a biscuit tin. The missing shares were not missing. They had been recorded, quietly, over 4 years, as ordinary shares, because every time Ko Sang-hoon bought a block back for the company, he had booked it as a conversion, which the clause did not allow. Because a buyback is not a resignation. Nobody had noticed, because nobody was ever going to notice. It was sloppy rather than criminal, in the way that things done for a family are usually sloppy rather than criminal. And it meant that when Madame Yoon Jang-hui looked at her own shareholder register, she saw a company where her side held 94% of the voting power. The real number was 31. Simone put the register down and pressed both hands flat on the floor and breathed for a while. "They don't know," she said out loud, to an empty room. "They actually don't know." The final piece arrived in March. And it arrived because Han Jun Seo brought it to her himself, which is a thing she thought about for a long time afterward. He came down to the polishing room at 9 at night with 2 cans of coffee and his tie already off, and he held both cans for 15 seconds and handed her one. And then he sat down on an upturned crate and said, "They want to sell the company." Simone said, "Who's they?"
My mother, Chairman Cha at Sagang. There's a deck.
"I've seen the deck. What's the number?" $150 million. He said it in dollars for her, which he always did. 210 billion won. Is it a good price? It's a fair price, Jun Seo said. For a company you're going to gut. He told her the rest of it in the flat voice of a man reading his own diagnosis. Sagang's model was consolidation. They owned 3 optics firms already. They would keep the clean room, keep the medical contracts, keep the brand for 18 months, and move the precision work to a plant in Chengdu that ran 2 shifts of machine polishing, which meant the polishing room.
All of it. 31 people, average age 54, average tenure 19 years.
"And you," he said. "Yours is a line item." They costed it. He put a single photocopied page on the crate between them. It was a page of an annex.
And it was a list of retention and separation assumptions. And there were 9 rows, and the 7th row said Senior, Operative U.S. National, Optics, Non-Transferable Process, Separation, Est.
4 million. 4 million won.
About $3,000.
That was the number the buyer had put on getting Simone Whitaker out of the building. She looked at it for a while. Then she folded it in half and handed it back to him, because she already had the important part memorized. "Are you going to sign it?" she asked. "I don't have the votes to stop it," Jun Seo said. "I have 25%. She has 43, and she has Cha, and she has the board, and she has..." He stopped. "Say it. She has a reason," he said.
That's the part I can't argue with. She's 61 and my father left her a company she doesn't understand and a son who won't get married and won't move to Seoul and spends his Saturdays in a factory.
"She thinks she's rescuing me." "From what?" Jun Seo looked at her. It was the closest they had come in 4 years.
"From the life I actually want," he said. "From the life I actually want," he said.
Simone stood up and put her can down on the crate, unopened, which she had never done. "Then get married," she said. "That's what she wants. Give it to her." "Simone, I'm serious." Her voice did not change at all. "You give her the wedding and she gives you the company. That's the trade she's offering. Take it and then don't sell the plant, and 31 people keep their jobs. And I'll go home to Baltimore and you'll have done the arithmetic correctly." She walked back to her bench and put her loop in and did not look up again. And after 4 minutes she heard him go. What she didn't know yet was that he had already been introduced to Cha the-rin twice, or that the 3rd introduction was in 9 days, and that her own name would come up at that dinner in a way that would end everything. The dinner was at a restaurant in Cheongdam with 11 seats and no sign on the door. Cha the-rin was 32, had studied in Boston, ran her father's foundation, and was, this is the part people always get wrong about these stories, genuinely pleasant. She asked Jun Seo good questions about aspic tolerances and listened to the answers. Halfway through, the waiter brought a warmed bottle of barley tea, and the Rin's hands were cold from the car, and Jun Seo picked up her cup and held it for a moment before he passed it to her. He did it without thinking. It took less than 2 seconds. He did not even notice he had done it. His mother noticed. Madame Yoon Jang-hoo had spent 9 years watching her son buy 2 cans of coffee out of a machine, and she had never once been able to prove anything, and she had never once been wrong. She smiled at the Rin and said something warm about the tea, and the dinner went on, and it was, by every account, a success. And in the car home, she called Ko Sang-hoon and told him she wanted everything the company had on the American in the polishing room. Ko Sang-hoon was good at his job in the narrow way that mattered. It took him 11 days. He pulled her payroll history, her grade changes, her visa file, her overtime, her sick days, of which there were 4 in 9 years. And then he pulled her bank transfer records, because the company processed her salary in a wage account leaves a shadow, and he found the thing that made him call the chairman at 10 at night. Every month for 9 years, on the 4th or 5th, Simone Whitaker had wired $900 to the United States. And every month, on the 20th, she had transferred 400,000 won to a different Korean personal account. Never the same 1-2 years running. 22 different names. She's paying someone, Ko Sang-hoon said. Or she's collecting for someone. It's structured. Nobody moves money like that by accident. Madam Yoon assumed the worst thing she could imagine, which was a private loan and a bad crowd. And that is the only reason Simone Whitaker survived the next 3 weeks. Because a woman looking for a loan shark does not think to look at a shareholder register. They came for her on a Tuesday. Simone was called to the 3rd floor, which had not happened in 4 years, and there were 3 of them in the room. Ko Sang-hoon, a woman from HR she had never spoken to, and the chairman. They asked her, with great delicacy, whether she was in financial difficulty. They asked whether she was being pressured by anyone. They asked whether she had ever been asked to take anything out of the building. Take what out of the building? Simone said. Process documentation, said Ko Sang-hoon. Simone let a silence go by that was exactly 2 seconds too long. Then she said, in careful formal Korean, the first full sentence she had ever spoken in Korean to anyone above the 2nd floor. Director, I wrote the process documentation. It's 41 pages. It's in the quality office. Anyone can read it. Would you like me to explain page 31 to you? Nobody said anything at all. It was Madam Yoon who recovered first, and she recovered by getting up. You speak Korean, she said. Yes, ma'am. For how long? 6 years. The chairman of Daejeon Optical looked at her for a long moment, and something moved behind her face that was not anger. It was closer to insult. Then you have been listening, she said. Yes, ma'am, Simone said. That's what the job is. She was back at her bench 40 minutes later. Kim Deon made her stop everything. For 6 weeks Simone bought nothing, wired nothing, met no one. Deon moved the remaining certificates out of the biscuit tin and into a safe deposit box at a bank in Bupyeong under a numbered arrangement, and made her memorize a number instead. The biscuit tin stayed on the shelf with nothing in it but her original 6,000 shares. Because Daeon said an empty hiding place is the thing that gets you caught. They looked at money, Daeon said. They didn't look at paper. If we're quiet, they will never look at paper, because looking at paper means admitting the paper matters. It was the longest 6 weeks of Simone's life, and it cost her 2 names. A man in Gimpo sold his 4,000 shares back to the company in April while she was frozen, and she found out in May. And she went into the stairwell of her own building and cried for 11 minutes with her fist against her mouth, and then washed her face and went back to work. 12,000 shares left to go. 3 names. And a deadline she had not chosen. The Sagang deal was going to a shareholder vote, and Deon's contact at the registry said the notice would come in the autumn. The last 3 took her 4 months. Number 27 was a woman named Baek in Suwon who had 2,000 shares and hung up on her twice. She sold in June because Simone drove out on a Sunday and helped her move a refrigerator. Number 28 had 6,000 and lived above a hardware store in Bukyeon and wanted to talk about Han-ji take for 3 hours before he would talk about anything else. Simone let him. She knew more stories about the founder than his own son did by the end of it. That left 4,000 shares, 1 name. And the name was Jo Man-sik's younger brother, Jo Man-gyu, who was 67. Who had never worked at Daejeon a day in his life, and who had inherited the shares when their cousin died. He would not see her. He would not see her in July or in August, and in September he sent a message through his brother that he had already agreed to sell to the company at the buyback price, and that the paperwork was with Director Ko. Simone read that message standing in the corridor by the vending machine at 11 at night. 110,000 shares. She needed 114. What she didn't know yet was that the man who was going to save the whole thing had been dead for 4 years, and that he had done it in 19 pages, on a Tuesday, against his own lawyer's advice. Kim Deon called her at 6:40 in the morning and did not say hello. Page 12, she said. Clause 9.2. Read it to me. Simone had the agreement in her hands in 11 seconds, because it lived under her mattress. Any proposed transfer of Class B shares, she read, shall first be offered to the remaining Class B holders, pro rata, on identical terms, for a period of 30 days. Say the last part again. For a period of 30 days. Simone, Dayoon said. He cannot sell to the company. Not legally. Not until he has offered it to you first, and you have had 30 days, and you have said no in writing. They've already done the paperwork. Then the paperwork is void, and I am going to send Director Ko a letter this morning that is going to ruin his week. The letter went out at 9. It was 2 paragraphs and it was extremely polite, and it cited the clause and asked for confirmation, in writing, that the company was aware of the preemption right of the remaining Class B holders. Ko Hang-hoon did not answer it for 6 days. When he did, he answered it by telephone personally, to Simone's landline in Bupyeong at 8 at night, in the voice of a man being reasonable with a child. Miss Whitaker, I think there's been a misunderstanding involving your lawyer. There hasn't, Simone said. These are technical formalities from a difficult period. Nobody applies them. Then it won't cost you anything to apply them. A pause. You have 6,000 shares, Ko Sang-hoon said. Do you understand that you are making yourself a problem over 8 million won? And Simone Whitaker, standing in a shared corridor in Bupyeong with a landlady's cat rubbing against her ankle, said the only thing she said in 9 years that she later admitted was a mistake. She said, Director, I have never once in my life been a problem over 8 million won. She heard him breathe. Then he said, Good night, and hung up, and Simone stood there with the receiver in her hand and thought, he heard it. He heard the whole thing. She bought Joe Mangyu's 4,000 shares 11 days later, at the buyback price plus 12%, with money she borrowed from Renata Cole against nothing but a handshake and a piece of paper in a lawyer's handwriting. Joe Man-sik drove his brother to the notary himself and sat in the waiting room with his arms crossed, the whole time like a man supervising a repair. Afterward, in the parking lot, the old man handed Simone the folder and did not let go of it right away. He would have liked this, he said. He'd have said I did it slowly. He'd have said you did it correctly, Joe Man-sik said. Which was worse from him? That night, on the 4th of October, Simone Whitaker went to the bank in Bupyeong and put the last certificate in the box, and did the arithmetic for the final time on a deposit slip. 114,000 Class B shares. 11.4% of Daejeon Optical. 1,140,000 votes. 40.7% of every vote that existed. And 6 retired men and 1 widow in Ansan who still held 42,000 Class B between them, and who had all, over 4 months, signed the same one-page proxy in Kim Dae-yoon's careful handwriting. Because the American had come to their funerals and their 60ths and their granddaughters' first birthdays for 9 years, and the company had come to none of them. 420,000 votes. 55.7%. Simone folded the deposit slip and put it in her coat pocket and walked home along the canal in the cold, and she did not feel triumphant. She felt like a woman who had just finished a very long shift. There was one thing left, and it was the thing that Dae-yoon said would decide everything, and it had to be timed to the day. A Korean company keeps a shareholder register, and a transfer is not good against the company until it is entered in that register. Certificates in a safe deposit box are private. A name in the register is public. Anyone on the board can pull it. The day we register you, Daeun said, is the day they know. So we register you the last legal day we can before the vote, and not 1 day earlier. The notice of the extraordinary general meeting was posted on the 14th of November. Meeting date, Monday the 8th of December. Agenda item 1, and there was only one item. Approval of the sale of the entire business and assets of Daejeon Optical Co., Ltd., to Sagang Partners for 210 billion won. Under the articles, the register closed at the end of business on Friday the 5th. Simone Whitaker had 21 days to survive, and 1 hour on a Friday afternoon to become the largest voting shareholder of the company she worked for. And it was during those 21 days that Madame Yoon Jang-hui, who had been advised by her finance director that the American was becoming difficult about a technicality, decided to solve the problem the way she had solved every problem in that building for 4 years. Quietly, bloodlessly, through HR. What Simone didn't know yet was that the meeting on her calendar for Friday the 5th of December at 2 o'clock, marked only grade review, had been scheduled by the chairman herself, or that the chairman had chosen that date for the same reason Kim Dae-eun had. Friday the 5th of December was cold and very clear, and Simone Whitaker got up at 4:30 in the morning like she had for 9 years. At 7 she was at her bench. At 11 she finished a batch of 14mm aspheres, 41 units, and every one of them passed. At 1 o'clock she ate rice and soup in the canteen with 2 women from packing and laughed at something about a son-in-law. At 10 to 2 she washed her hands, took off her lab coat, hung it on the hook, and went up to the 3rd floor. The room they used was the small boardroom, which was itself a decision, because grade reviews happen in HR offices. There were 4 people in it. Madam Yoon Jang-hui at the head of the table, Ko Sang-hoon on her right, the HR manager, who had brought a folder and did not open it once, and a young woman from General Affairs whose entire job that afternoon was to be a witness. Han Jun SEO was not in the building. He had been sent to Chengdu on Wednesday to tour a plant he had no reason to tour. Simone noticed that, and understood it completely, and it was the only thing that afternoon that hurt. There was no chair pulled out for her, so she pulled one out. Madam Yoon slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "Effective Monday," she said in Korean. "Your position is reclassified. Grade 7, General Cleaning Services, 2nd Building and Cleanroom Ancillary." Simone read it. Grade 7 paid 1,200,000 won a month. About $900. It was almost exactly 40% of what she had made the day before, which is a number that meant something to nobody in that room except her. "There is a transfer acknowledgement at the bottom," Madam Yoon said. "You may sign it. Or, if the terms are unacceptable, you may of course submit a resignation, and the company will handle your departure generously." "How generously?" Simone asked. Ko Sang-hoon said, without looking up, 4 million won. And there it was. The 7th row of the annex, read out loud in a boardroom, by the man who had written it. Simone put the paper down on the table and squared its edges with 2 fingers. "Ma'am," she said in Korean, "may I ask one question before I sign?" Madam Yoon inclined her head. "Does the change of grade affect the class of my shares?" The room went completely still. Ko Sang-hoon's pen stopped. The young woman from General Affairs looked up from her notes for the first time. And Madam Yoon Jang-hui, 61 years old, chairman of the board, 4 days from selling her late husband's company for 210 billion won, laughed. It was not cruel. That was somehow the worst part. It was genuinely amused. "You have 6,000 shares, she said. "My husband handed out confetti in a bad year because he could not pay his people. And he called it stock, and it made him feel like a good man. It is not a shareholding. It is a souvenir." "Yes, ma'am," Simone said. "Do you know what 6,000 shares is worth?" 12 million won, at the price your director pays," Simone said. "I've watched him pay it 11 times. For 1 second, Madam Yoon's face changed. "Not much, just enough." Then Simone picked up the pen and signed the transfer acknowledgement in a clear, unhurried hand and turned it around and pushed it back across the table. "Then I'll take the mop," she said. She stood up and pushed her chair in, because her mother had raised her, and she got as far as the door. And then she turned around with her hand on the frame and asked the second question, the one that Madam Yoon Jang-hu would think about later for the rest of her life. "Ma'am, Monday's meeting, is it still at 9? The chairman of Daejeon Optical did not move. "I beg your pardon. The extraordinary general meeting," Simone said, pleasantly, in Korean. "It was posted on the notice board by the time clock on the 14th. It has to be, ma'am. It's the law. Everybody's been reading it for 3 weeks. That meeting does not concern you." "No, ma'am," Simone said. "I just want to be on time." And she left. She was in the stairwell before her hands started shaking, and she did not let herself stop on the landing, because the 2nd building was 400 meters away and Kim Dae-eun's car was parked outside it with the engine running. At 3:40 on Friday the 5th of December, in the General Affairs office of Daejeon Optical, Simone Whitaker and her lawyer presented 114,000 Class B share certificates, 28 notarized deeds of transfer, 7 signed proxies, and a written request that the shareholder register be amended before its statutory closing at 6 o'clock. The clerk who took them was 24 years old. She counted the certificates twice because she had never seen a certificate before. And then she went to get her manager, and her manager went to get the general affairs director, and the general affairs director stood in a corridor for 4 minutes with a piece of paper in his hand, doing a calculation that got worse every time he did it. He entered them at 4:51. He had to. It is a ministerial act. A company registrar in Korea does not have discretion over a valid transfer. And Kim Dae-yeon had put that sentence in the request in bold type, which is why he did it in an hour instead of a week. At 5 o'clock the register closed. And in the register of Daejeon Optical Company Limited, in a database that 11 people had the password to, the largest single voting block in the company had a new name on it. Simone did not go home. She and Dae-yeon sat in Renata Cole's restaurant in Itaewon until midnight while Renata cooked for them and refused to take any money. And at around 10 Renata put her hand flat on the table and said, "Say it out loud one time." For me, and Simone Whitaker, who had eaten rice and soup for 9 years so that other people's fathers could keep their pieces of paper. Sod. 55.7%. And then she put her head down on the table and cried for about 4 minutes, which was all she allowed herself because the meeting was on Monday and she had a mop to pick up in the morning. What she didn't know yet was that Ko Sang-hoon pulled the register at 8:15 on Saturday morning, or that he sat in his car in the parking lot for 40 minutes before he found the courage to call the chairman. On Saturday morning, Simone Whitaker reported to the second building at 7 o'clock in a gray coverall and drew a mop, a bucket, and a set of keys from the store's window. Grade 7, General Cleaning Services. Effective Monday. But there was a Saturday shift going and she had signed the paper, so she went. She cleaned the corridor outside the clean room she had worked in for 9 years. And at 9:20 she was on her knees doing the floor track of the air shower when the first car came into the yard too fast. By 10 there were 4 cars. At 11, the HR manager came down and told her, in a voice that had gone strange, that the chairman would like to see her, and Simone said, "I have the second building until 3, sir. I'll come at 3, and she went back to the floor track. It is the only genuinely petty thing she did in the entire 9 years, and she has never once apologized for it. They tried 3 things over the next 51 hours, and it is worth knowing what they were, because it tells you exactly who everyone was. The first thing they tried was money. Ko Sang-hoon offered on Saturday afternoon in that same small boardroom to buy the entire Class B block back at 4 times the buyback price. Then 8 times. Then at 4:40 with his tie loosened and a number written on a legal pad. 12 times. 980 million won cash that day. About $730,000. It was more money than Simone Whitaker had ever seen written down with her name near it. It was also, as Kim Dae-yeon pointed out in the corridor without changing her expression, roughly 1/180th of the transaction it would have unblocked. "No thank you," Simone said. "Miss Whitaker." Ko Sang-hoon's hands were flat on the table. "You will never see an offer like this again in your life. Do you understand what you are doing?" "Director," Simone said, "I understand it better than anyone in this building." That's the whole problem, isn't it? The second thing they tried was her visa. It took Madam Yoon until Sunday morning to be told, by a lawyer she was paying a great deal of money, that a person cannot be removed from a country in 36 hours because a company has become irritated with her, and that attempting it in writing would be evidence in the proceeding that was now certainly coming. The third thing they tried was Han Jun-seo. He came back from Changju on Saturday night. He had been told about the register in a phone call at a service station on the expressway and had, according to the driver, said nothing for 110 kilometers. He came to Bupyeong at 11 at night and stood in the shared corridor on the 4th floor because Simone would not let him in. And they talked in a doorway with the landlady's television going next door. 9 years, he said. 9 years, Simone said. "You never told me." "No, Simone." His voice cracked right down the middle of her name. "Did you think I would have stopped you?" No, she said. I thought you'd have helped me. And then in 9 years you'd have been the son who helped the American take the company from his mother. And there is no version of that where you come out the other side still being you. She looked at him. I didn't keep it from you because I didn't trust you, she said. I kept it from you because it was mine to carry and you had enough. Geneseo put his back against the wall and slid down it and sat on the floor of a corridor in Bupayong in a $4,000 coat. She's going to lose the company, he said. She's going to lose the sale, Simone said. Those are different, and by Monday night she's going to understand the difference for the first time in 4 years. And what am I supposed to do on Monday? And Simone Whitaker crouched down in the doorway so that she was at his eye level and said the thing that ended the argument he had been having with himself since he was 29 years old. Vote how your father would have voted, she said. Not for me, not for her.
Just read the room he built and vote for that.
And then go home and be able to stand it. The last thing that happened before Monday happened at 9 o'clock on Sunday night. Madame Yoon Jang-hui came to Bupyeong alone. She came in her own car, without her driver, and she parked badly. And she climbed 4 flights of stairs in a building with no elevator and a light that had been broken since August. And she stood in a corridor that smelled of other people's dinner. And when Simone opened the door in a sweatshirt with her hair wrapped, the chairman of Daejeon Optical looked past her once, into a room that was 3 meters by 4 with a mattress on the floor and a biscuit tin on a shelf. This is where you live, Madame Yoon said. Yes, ma'am. On what my company pays you. On about a third of what your company pays me, Simone said. The rest went to your husband's men. One at a time, the older woman stood there for a long moment. He paid them in paper because he had nothing else, she said at last. I sat in that yard. I heard him do it. I told him that night he had just given away the only thing he owned. Her voice was perfectly level. He said, Jang Hui, if it ever costs us anything, it will be because we deserved it. Yes, ma'am, Simone said. That sounds like him. I have hated that sentence for 9 years. I know, Simone said. I could tell. Madame Yoon looked at the biscuit tin on the shelf for a second longer than she meant to. Then she said, You will humiliate my family on Monday in front of Chairman Cha and 11 of my husband's friends. No, ma'am, Simone said. I'm going to vote. That's all I'm going to do. Everything else in that room is something you already did. And she closed the door, gently, and stood behind it with her hand over her mouth until she heard the last of 4 flights of footsteps go. The extraordinary general meeting of Daejeon Optical Company Limited opened at 9 o'clock on Monday the 8th of December, in the boardroom on the 4th floor of the head office in Incheon. There were 26 people in the room. Chairman Cha Won-ho of Sagong Partners sat on the visitor's side with 2 lawyers and his daughter, and he had brought a pen in a box, because he had been told this would take 11 minutes. 11 of the ordinary shareholders were men over 70 who had known Han Ji-taek since the 80s and had come mostly to see each other. Madame Yoon Jang-hui sat at the head of the table in dove gray with her hands folded. And she had not slept and nobody could tell? Han Jun Seo sat at her right, 3 feet away, and had said good morning to her and nothing else. At 2 minutes to 9, the door opened and 7 old people came in. Jo Man-sik, 71, in a suit from a wedding in 2004. His brother. A widow from Ansan with a handbag on her arm. A man from Buckyan who had lived above a hardware store. 3 more, all of them over 65, all of them in their good clothes. They had come on the 6:40 train. They had come because they had shares in a company, and there was a meeting. And in 51 years of working, nobody had ever once told them that a meeting was a thing they were allowed to attend. The general affairs clerk seated them along the wall. And at 9 o'clock exactly, Simone Whitaker walked into the boardroom of Daejeon Optical in a gray coverall with the second building keys still on her belt. Because it was Monday, and Monday was the effective date on the transfer she had signed. And she had spent the first hour of her shift doing the corridor on the ground floor. She did not sit at the table. She sat in the 3rd chair against the wall, between Jo Man-sik and the widow from Ansan, and she put her hands in her lap. Chairman Chow looked at her, and then at Madame Yoon, and said, in a voice of enormous patient distaste, Is the cleaning staff attending shareholder meetings now? And old Joe Man-sik said, without getting up, "She's not cleaning staff today, sir. Today she's the meeting." The agenda had one item. The company secretary read the resolution.
Approval of the sale of the entire business and assets of Daejeon Optical to Seging Partners for 210 billion won.
Madam Yoon called for the vote by poll, because the articles required it, and because she had been advised on Sunday afternoon by 3 lawyers in a row that there was no version of the morning where she got to avoid it. The scrutineer was a notary from a firm in Incheon that had done Daejeon's work since 1991.
He was 73 years old and he had drafted as a young man the shareholders' agreement of that terrible year, and he had argued against Clause 9 and lost.
He collected the ballot papers and the proxies, and he took 8 minutes, and the room got quieter, every one of them. Then he stood up.
Ordinary shares present or represented, he read.
800,000. 800,000 votes.
Class B shares present or represented.
200,000. 2 million votes.
Total votes cast, 2,800,000.
He turned the page. In favor of the resolution, 1,240,000 votes. 44.3%.
Against the resolution, 1,560,000 votes.
55.7%.
The resolution is not carried. Nobody in that room moved for about 4 seconds.
Then Chairman Cha Won-ho said, "Against by whom?" And the notary, who had waited 9 years for a reason he had never told anybody, looked down at his page and read it out.
Against Joe Man-sik, 4,000 Class B Joe Man-gyu, 4,000 Class B by transfer.
Baek Sun-hui, 2,000 Class B Yan Dae-ho, 6,000.
He read for a minute and a half, 29 names. Some of them dead men's names, held now by their widows and their daughters.
And then he said the last one.
Against Simone Whitaker,
114,000 Class B shares. 1,140,000 votes, which is 40.7% of the total voting power of this company, and the largest single holding of record. He put the page down.
By the register and by the founders' agreement of 2017, control of Daejeon Optical Company Limited.
The company you have all come here this morning to sell for 210 billion won. $150 million is held by Miss Simone Whitaker.
Chairman Cha Won-ho put his pen back in its box.
He looked down the length of the table at Madam Yoon Jang-hui for a long moment, and what was in his face was not anger.
It was the specific contempt of a man who has just learned that the person selling him something did not know what she owned.
"Madam Chairman," he said, "I flew people in from Frankfurt."
Then he stood up and buttoned his jacket and left, and his daughter went after him, and neither of them ever came back.
And that was when Kim Dae-yeon, standing at the back of the room in a plain black suit,
"Sod. Chair, before the meeting closes, my client has a statement, and there is a second matter."
Madam Yoon said, without turning her head, "The meeting is closed." "The meeting cannot be closed, ma'am, until the demand is read into the minutes," Dae-yoon said. Clause 9.4.
And she read it, that on Friday the 5th of December at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, in that room, the board of Daejeon Optical had reduced the grade and pay of a Class B holder by 60%, in writing with a witness present, 4 days before a shareholder vote on a sale of the entire business,
which triggered the founder's valuation clause,
which suspended any transaction before the board pending an independent valuation,
which is a thing they had done to themselves in advance for free with a pen,
because they were certain that 6,000 shares was confetti.
"You didn't need to do it," Dae-yoon said, quite gently, to the room. "The votes were already there.
You just made sure it could never be undone."
The independent valuation took 11 weeks.
It came back at 204 billion won, which is to say that Segang's price had been fair,
and that Simone Whitaker had turned down $150 million in a room while wearing a set of keys on her belt.
It also came back with a 9-page annex on the Class B register, and the annex is what finished KO Sang-hoon.
44,000 shares had been booked as conversions that the agreement did not permit,
not stolen.
Just filed wrong 11 times, always in the same direction, always in favor of the same side. He resigned in February by letter, and the letter was 2 lines long, And he was 56, and nobody in that industry took his calls after March. Madam Yoon Jang-hui stood down as chairman of the board on the 9th of March, at a meeting that lasted 18 minutes. She was not removed. Nobody moved against her. She stood down because it had become by then arithmetically pointless not to. The board elected Simone Whitaker chairman that same morning, with the votes of 114,000 Class B shares, 7 proxies from people in their 60s and 70s, and 25% of the ordinary stock, voted by Han Jun-aco, out loud, in front of his mother. He stayed on as chief executive. That was Simone's first motion as chairman, and she made it before anybody could make a different one. "He's good at it," she said to the board.
"I've watched him do it for 4 years from a bench."
"I'd know."
The polishing room did not move to Chengdu.
It got 11 new people over the following 2 years, 4 of them apprenticed to Jo Man-sik, who came out of retirement 2 days a week at 71 for a fee he described publicly as insulting and privately as the best thing that ever happened to him.
The 14mm asphere is still made by hand in Incheon.
Page 31 is still the reason.
And in the spring, Daejeon Optical did something small that a newspaper eventually wrote about,
which is that it reissued Class B shares to every person who had sold theirs back to the company in the bad years,
at the price they had sold them for, adjusted for nothing at all.
16 households, 4 of them widows. Kim Chun-ho, whose daughter had read a shareholders agreement over catfish in Itaewon, got 4,000 shares back at the age of 62. He came to the office to sign for them in a suit and shook Simone's hand with both of his and could not say very much. Simone Whitaker went home to Baltimore in June, for the first time in 9 years. She took a man with her. Yvonne Whitaker opened the door of a row house on Poplar Grove Street, looked at her daughter for about 2 seconds, and then looked past her at the tall Korean man standing on her steps holding 2 grocery bags and a bunch of flowers he had bought at a gas station because he had panicked. She said, 9 years.
Well, at least you brought something.
They were married the following spring in the yard of the plant in Incheon, because Simone said the yard was where the whole thing had actually happened. 140 people came. Jo Man-sik gave a speech that went 11 minutes over and was mostly about a dead man. Renata Cole did the food and would not let anyone else touch it, and Kim Dae-yoon cried harder than the bride. And in the 3rd row, in dove gray, sat Madam Yoon Jang-hui, who had been invited and who had accepted, and who had asked Simone one question when the invitation came, in the doorway of the chairman's office that used to be hers. "Why?" she said. "Because he'd have wanted his wife at his son's wedding," Simone said. "That's all it is, ma'am. It isn't forgiveness.
It's just the correct thing, and I've had 9 years of practice doing the correct thing when nobody was watching.
It was not a warm relationship afterward. It was, eventually, a real one. Simone still gets to the plant at 4:30 in the morning twice a week. The rest of the days she is in Seoul in a room with a table, being called chairman by people who are older than she is. There is a biscuit tin on the shelf behind her desk with nothing in it. People ask about it. She tells them it was for cookies. If you asked her now, what she would tell another woman who is being quietly walked out of a place she built,
a woman whose grade keeps getting reclassified, whose bench gets moved,
who gets talked about in the 3rd person while she is standing there, she would not tell you to be patient. She would tell you to read the paperwork from the bad years. Because the ugly, useful truth of it is this: the things a company hands out when it is desperate are the only things it will ever hand out for free. They give them to you because they are certain, that day, that they are worthless.
And then they get rich, and they forget the year they were poor, and they stop reading their own documents.
They handed it to us because they thought it was nothing. That is how almost all of it gets handed to us.
So take it. Sign for it. Put it somewhere safe.
And be in the room on the day they count. If Simone's story reminded you of your own quiet patience, or of somebody you know who is being made small in a place they helped build, this is where that story gets to matter.
Subscribe if this channel has earned a place in your feed, and stay close.
Because there are more women like Simone whose stories deserve to be told. And I want to ask you something specific. On that Saturday afternoon, they slid 980 million won across the table. $730,000 cash that day. For a woman living in a room in Bupyeong with a mattress on the floor and a mother on dialysis in Baltimore. Would you have taken it? Or would you have waited until Monday morning? Be honest. Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know where you land and why. Thank you for staying until the end. I'll see you in the next story.